So it's been a week since the last video from myself with grinding out tuning XP and weapon parts in the Sigma sector, showing Tormentor who's actually getting tormented here, and overall just having some fun trying out the new stuff in place for skill and weapon builds alike. Finally though, I'm in a place where I'm very happy with my builds both Descendant and weapon wise, so that I can rock up to Purge Level 30 and clear that content in less than 3 minutes. So in today's video we'll be looking at the build that I use for Purge mode Serena, along with all the extra bits like tuning boards, weapons to slot in with you, and their respective builds as well, so you can start clearing the content just as fast as I can, or even push me even further down those leaderboards. If that all sounds good to you though, then let's get to it. Now of course let's start off by talking about the actual build when it comes to the modules. That's the best place that we always start with, and to be fair, talking about this build, there is only one real skill that we really need to kind of focus on here, and that is going to be a skill 4, and that's going to be called Redemption. Now we've already covered this before in a previous guide, but essentially how Redemption works is that we are aiming to use this when we're off the ground, so we just do like a little jump, or we activate Soar, so that we're not actually touching the ground, and then activating that again gives us Redemption's Judgment. Now this is a massive AoE damage increase to the point of around about 3 to 4 times the amount of damage that we can actually do per shot, which is insane, and especially as soon as we start then stacking it up with other kind of weapons that have additional effects that happens on it as well, they also then trigger this like this huge AoE as well, so we're really just kind of like dishing out the pain by using this ability. Now the kind of intent with this build and what makes it different from previous mobbing builds and Colossus builds and everything like that is that we're trying to have 100% uptime of this over an extended period of time. In this case of like a Colossus build, you just kind of want to make sure that you burst it down within a couple of seconds. In a mobbing build, it's actually excessive amounts of damage, so you don't actually need to rely on it too much. You can just have it as like a DPS phase for taking out bosses, whereas in a Purge mode, you do need to be able to rely on having this up 100% of the time to get the fastest kind of runs. Now we do this in several different ways. We do use so many different ways to be able to increase the amount of HP that we have. So in this case, we have Stim Accelerant and increased HP to give us the biggest amount of HP increases. On top of that, we also go for increased shield, which then gives us even more shield on top of it of what we already have at base, and then we combine it all into overwhelming HP, so that when our shield, or what number we would have had, we take roughly 20% of that and then we add that to our HP, so that gives us even more HP to be able to start putting back into that DPS when it comes to skill 4. Now in terms of the quality of life when it comes to that skill though, in terms of being able to maintain that 100% uptime, we have to use things like Nimble Fingers and MP Conversion to be able to get that skill cooldown all the way right down. We also have Focus on Fire. This is primarily here to be able to get that skill cooldown bonus, but to be fair, the fire skill power isn't, the worst thing in the world to be able to have on the build. And we also have Multi-Talented, because when we use a Dimension active skill, we then get that 20.5% skill cooldown for 5 seconds, and wouldn't you know it, our skill 3 as well as our skill 4 are both Dimension skills, and those are the ones that we're primarily going to be using when we're out and about inside of the Purge mode. Now the last little bits of quality of life when it comes to this are going to be skill duration, so maximized duration. This does come at the downside of some skill power modifier, but because of the way we're kind of using this build inside of Purge mode, we're not going to be worrying about skill power modifier whatsoever, similar to like how Focus on Fire is primarily used for the skill cooldown and not for the skill power itself. The exact same thing for maximized duration. We essentially want the longest duration increase that we can do, so therefore maximized duration is going to be giving us that biggest increase right there. And then lastly, skill expansion, similar to like how we could use maximized range, but skill expansion gives us a massive increase in the amount of range that our skill 4 is going to be dealing. So in this case, going from 8 meters up to 15.4 meters, and that allows us to be able to then start wiping the floor with mobs regardless of where they spawn, rather than having to try and get lucky with where they actually end up spawning inside that room. Now in terms of stats, that does then leave us at roughly around about 35.4k HP. We will be talking about the components as to how we get to this number, but essentially just know that 35.4k HP is going to be more than enough to be able to make us tanky, to be able to survive some of those shots that are going to be coming our way, but it's also a massive increase in the amount of damage that we can do, and there are a couple of ways that you could necessarily increase this further, but it will then come at the downside of being able to reduce your cooldown, which means that you might not necessarily have that 100% uptime, things along those kind of lines, so you do have to be able to factor that into the build before you then start swapping over a few of those modules. Now reactor talk, in terms of like the type of reactor, it doesn't really matter. The main kind of thing that you do need to be able to focus on though is going to be those sub-rolls. Mainly because when it comes to mounting, when it comes to powering up the actual reactor itself, when it comes to the skill power boost ratios, things like that, because the skill 4 doesn't actually rely on skill power to be able to get that damage boost in the first place, that's where the HP comes into it, we don't actually have to worry about that kind of mounting. You can just rock any kind of reactor you want. If you want to have a chill or an electric one, feel free, but the main things that we are looking for at the bottom are going to be skill duration up as well as skill cooldown. Now ideally you do want those as gold rolls. That will help you be able to get to 100%. You can absolutely be able to get away with lesser rolls when it comes to this build. You don't actually need gold rolls to have that 100% uptime, but the more that you get, obviously the easier it is to be able to actually use it out and about in the field, so feel free to be able to get gold rolls if you can actually go and grab some. Now, components-wise, it gets a little bit more tricky. The main kind of thing to note here is that you don't actually need a set bonus to be able to get the most out of Purge runs. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely had a blast being able to run Ascending Armory because I was trying to keep my ammo's kind of stock like fully topped up wherever possible when I was constantly reloading. It means that I didn't have to worry too much about being able to find some ammo bricks on the floor to be able to keep myself going. But the main kind of downside to that is that while they do have fantastic rolls and while it does also give you that skill cost and everything like that, unfortunately when it comes to the memory as well as being able to go for the processor, you will notice that the max HP roll is a little bit down. It is down at 484. You actually do kind of want to be able to go for pieces that do roll 646 in terms of that max HP, because all of this is base HP that then gets put into all the modules that we've already kind of like covered when it comes to the build, and obviously the bigger number that you have when it goes into those percentages, obviously the more HP you have, and the more HP you have, the more damage you're going to be doing. So while it is nice quality of life to be able to have that skill cost reduction and being able to get some of your bullets back every 10 seconds and things like that, it actually makes the most sense to be able to get the fastest clears by going for pieces that have that 646 roll when it comes to max HP and being able to get the most HP into skill 4 so that you have the most DPS. Now, while I do have these 4 pieces here, there are a couple of others that do work in the exact same slots. The main thing is, like I said, just to keep an eye out for that max HP roll, and then just work your way down and just being able to slot those in. The ones that I've gone for here are going to be Distorted Resolve, going for the Ascending Armory Sensor, the Annihilation Memory, and the Slayer Processor. All of these have 646, and that gives you the kind of biggest increases. Now, in terms of sub-rolls, to be able to get the most out of this kind of build, there are a couple of things that you do absolutely have to lock in, and then there are a couple of things that are really nice to have. In this case, going for the Distorted Resolve or the Auxiliary Power side of things, you do want to be able to get a max HP roll in there. The more gold that you can, the better. Obviously, I have seen a couple that have gone pushed over 900, so kind of I do need to be able to get a better Distorted Resolve kind of roll in that kind of sense, but as long as you've got a gold roll in there, you're absolutely goated. And the same with the Slayer Processor, you do want to be able to get a max shield roll and be able to get that gold, and obviously that gold, that max shield will then roll into the max shield modules that you do have, and that means more HP overall for the build. Not as prevalent as the max HP, but still it does give you more HP, and that's the main thing that you do actually need to factor in for that. Now, outside the HP and the shield rolls, obviously this is a build that we are going to be reliably using the skills, and because we don't have anything to be able to reduce cost, MP is going to be kind of crucial for this build, because we do rely on being able to have our MP ready for skill 4 to be able to have that active and to be able to get all that DPS. So in this case, we do want things like MP recovery out combat, MP rolls, MP recovery in combat, and MP recovery modifier. If you can get all 4 of those with this mishmash of kind of reactors or the components that you do have here, then absolutely perfect. You can get away with not actually having those on there. I would recommend that you do at least have the max MP roll, because that's going to be helping you out and being able to keep you sustained throughout the whole kind of level. You don't have to worry about being able to find those blue orbs on the floor, but as long as you've got any kind of like combination of the ones that we've just kind of discussed, you'll be absolutely fine and you'll be able to get all the way to the end in record time. So now that we've covered all the gear requirements, let's start talking about weaponry and talking about like the builds that kind of make those up. Now, we do have one weapon that has pretty much kind of made its way through Purge 30s ever since Purge 30s kind of dropped, and then we have 2 brand new weapons that have dropped with Season 2 Episode 2, and we'll be looking into what those weapons make them so unique, and then we'll be talking about the builds that you do want to be able to run for Purge 30s. Now, let's start with the one that we already kind of know and believe. You might have seen this already in my bombing run build, but this is going to be the Restored Relic. If we click over into the build, you will notice there's a couple of changes, but it's around about the same kind of thing. The main kind of thing to note here is that we do have max high power rounds on both kind of modules here. That's going to be helping us with the purple bricks that do drop to be able to keep us at ammo's kind of like topped up, especially with the doggo that's running around and being able to restock us as well. That really just kind of helps us there. To be fair, because of how we are planning on using the Restored Relic in this kind of run, you don't actually need to have both of these. You absolutely can take off the one, especially the one that's affecting your movement speed, and you can definitely chuck in a chill priority, for example, to be able to get a little bit more chill damage out of it. The main thing is that we are trying to run this into crit. This usually works out to be around about 1 in 4 chance of being able to land that crit, so it's around about 23-25% critical hit rate. So you will get some really nice things to be able to get off this, but the main thing is that we do have the increased radius to help us out with that mobbing, and we primarily use this to be able to wipe the floor with the mobs that the boss spawns near the end, because we will be using the Malevolent to be able to clear up leading up to that, and then we will be using the other Knight gun, the AK, to be able to actually take down the boss. So you will primarily using this to be able to spread the amount of damage and soak up that area and just absolutely litter it with DPS. Now let's start talking about the Malevolent. Well, obviously this is, like I said, this is the brand new hand cannon that came in the Battle Pass, but you will need the paid track to be able to get these fully maxed out. Being able to get this fully maxed out allows you to be able to fire up to 3 bladed cogs if you land it on a body shot, and 4 if you land it on a weak point hit. These will then bounce 5 times individually, so you know, they'll constantly, every single time you fire the gun, it will fire 3 cogs and they'll bounce 5 times to a nearby enemy, and then they'll bounce back and forth. If there's no other nearby enemies, this gun won't do anything, which is kind of sucks. So it doesn't make it a very good bossing weapon in that sense, but it does make it a fantastic mobber. And just know that every single time this bounces, it will do your firearm damage times 24%. The real reason why this is fantastic, though, is that because of how Serena's skill 4 works, any kind of additional effects that come from the unique ability of the gun will trigger that skill 4 massive explosion. So just know that you will get the initial explosion from hitting, and then every single cog, every single time it bounces, will then trigger it again, and this is why we have so much DPS when it comes to this gun, and that's why we rely on this to be able to actually trigger all the mobbing side of things to be able to get us to that boss room. Now when it comes to the information side of things, the main kind of things to take away from here is that we do have some respectable stuff over here, but we aren't going to be building this into crit because it has a 1% chance. I mean, weak point's pretty solid at 2.5%, but because of how we're going to be using this gun, we're not going to rely on being able to hit those weak points, so we're not going to build into this too much. And the other thing is that the multi-hit damage, which is the brand new stuff, is only 8.2x, which isn't huge, so therefore it doesn't really make too much sense to build into that and to be able to sacrifice a few slots. So let's head ourselves over to the module side of things, and let's start talking about the build that we have gone for. Because it is Purge Level 30, we have gone for chill and chill priority to get ourselves some nice chill attack right there. We have gone into base attack, so we have gone into action reaction, rifling reinforcement, as well as charge amplification, because we are not going to be landing those critical hits with a 1% chance of being able to critically hit. We have increased our magazine size, we have increased our fire rate, which is really nice. The main kind of flex spot here is going to be payouts. Now, I did go for payout because, one, it's quite nice to be able to actually get unlimited bullets, just even if it's for 3 seconds, to be able to help us out. It helps us out with a little bit with ammo woes as well, so we don't have to constantly pick up those green kind of like bricks that land on the floor. I have seen a few other people go for Snowflake Conductor. I personally don't think this is great, mainly because while it is quite nice to be able to get that firearm attack, the main kind of issue that you have with the gun is that if you spec this up correctly, you'll be firing so fast that you'll kill enemies in record time anyway. It only has a 12.5% base tribute status trigger rate as well, so unless you spec into this to be able to help it out, you're not really going to be reliably applying that. Whereas if I do go for something like payout, it's going to be helping me with ammo. It's also going to be something that I can manually trigger as well, so I can purposely aim for that weak point attack to be able to then get that 3 seconds, so I don't have to rely on chance of being able to get a measly kind of like 23% increase to my firearm attack. It's not huge, so therefore I don't think this is a substantial increase to the amount of damage that you can deal, so therefore I would rather go for something like payout to be able to spread out a few more bullets to be able to help me out when it comes to not having to worry about ammo so much. Now, the last gun that we do need to be able to talk about is going to be our boss killer, and this is one that's going to be wiping the floor with everything to do with the Greg clone that pretty much spawns right at the end. This is going to be the Ancient Knight. This is the brand new assault rifle that came for Serena. It pretty much is geared towards what Serena's kit is, and the main kind of thing to take away from this is that its unique ability is that when reloading in air, you get float, and when you trigger a multi-hit when you're in mid-air, you also get atonement. Both of these are removed when you touch the ground. Float is okay. I mean, yes, you're increasing the amount of range that you'll be getting on the gun, so it won't be dropping off as soon, and it will also give you a chance of being able to get some HP back, which whoop-de-doo, who cares. But the main thing is going to be atonement, and atonement is whenever you land that multi-hit, which we are going to get up to 98% multi-hit chance with this build. You will then get a max of 10 stacks, and each one of these is going to be increasing your multi-hit damage by 7.7. This does mean that it maxes out at 77% increase to the amount of base critical multi-hit damage that you will be dealing, and of course that then gets increased even further if you then go through things like modules. The last thing to kind of point out with this gun is that it is atrocious, similar to like how we just went through with the Malevolent. It is atrocious across the board for other stats. So in this case we have a 3% critical hit rate, so not worth it going into that whatsoever. Weak point damage is a measly 1x, so once again not worth going into that, but the multi-hit damage is very respectful at 0.54x at base, and of course we then add the 77% on top of that, which is allowing us to be able to get to 1.31x, I believe it is, and then it gets increased even further by then going through modules as well. Now speaking of modules, this is going to be the build that I would recommend to be able to absolutely melt that Greg clone right at the end. It is also pretty good for that mobbing side of things. I just kind of rely on the Malevolent a little bit more because it can trigger it from the cogs that it does do, but this can still absolutely do some work. So if you are going for the Malevolent, if you are going into the Battle Pass, if you're not going for the pay track or anything like that, you absolutely can get some work done with this Ancient Knight build. And once again, we are going into things like base firearm attack, so we are going for charge amplification, firearm attack, action reaction, fire rate up. We have gone for chill priority and chill enhancement once again. We've gone for firing fiesta. Once again, this is another fantastic mod to be able to, so we are going to be stacking up its fire rate, so it is going to be an absolute like blistering speed. So the idea is that once you swap to this gun, you then use saw, it activates the reload. You then next 3 seconds you will be firing out a ton of bullets, and obviously you don't need to reload. This allows us to be able to one mag down the per phase of the boss when it comes to the Greg clone. And then lastly, it's going to be the multi-hit mods, which in this case is going to be multi-percussion sight and also multi-piercing sights. Now how these one works is that we will be absolutely decimating our critical hit damage, but because of that 3% win, we don't care that whatsoever. So in this case we will be getting the biggest increase to our multi-hit chance at 30% at base, and then we'll also get a 70% increase to our multi-hit damage, which will filter into the base amount that the gun does have, as well as obviously all the stacks that we will be getting from landing those multi-hits. So it is a huge increase to the amount of damage that we'll have all round. Swapping over to the Inversion Reinforcement, the things that kind of help us out here, there are some fantastic modules that we do need to be able to grab. I ideally would recommend that you do get this fully maxed out to really appreciate some of these capstones, but in this case you do want to go for Attributes, so you want to get your chill focus rounds. That's going to be giving you even more chill attack on everything that you're doing. This works really fantastically with Malevolent, it works fantastically with Ancient Knight, it works fantastically with Restored Relic. Any kind of gun you absolutely want to be able to slot one of these in, but on top of that, if you manage to hit an enemy, you will be then applying enhanced focus rounds after you've hit max stacks, and this will then reduce the amount of resistance that they do have up to 20%, so that's fantastic, even more damage. If you get Hunt maxed out, you then get access to Area Burst Inducer. This will then increase the amount of damage that will be coming into those targets in a small radius as well by 13%, so this is going to help you be able to burst down that boss as well. We are also going for Survival with Biodensity Augmentation. This is when we do some kind of like mobbing, when we absolutely wipe the floor with 5 enemies, we then get an increase of 11.7% to our max HP up to 5 stacks, so we are going over 55% HP just from grabbing this. By doing this increases the amount of max HP we have. This then increases the amount of damage that our skill 4 is then going to be applying with all the amount of damage that we'll be dealing, so it's essentially just an extra increase to the amount of DPS we'll be chucking out, so I would recommend that. And then lastly, when it comes to seasonal, you do have a couple of choices. I know a few people have gone for Evolutionary Cutting Mechanism, which increases the amount of cogs that fly out from Malevolent to be able to go from 3 up to 5. It is a fantastic module, but I already think the Malevolent already does its job fantastically in the first place. We don't actually need any more cogs to be able to help us out with that, especially when you will be primarily focusing on the elite in the first place, and the cogs are then going to go across to the squishier side of things when it comes to mobs, so you won't see too much of a benefit from that, whereas instead if you go for an aerial maneuvering raider, this absolutely helps the Ancient Knight to be able to do even more damage. It helps us get up to 98% multi-hit chance, which is fantastic, and on top of that it also has a chance of being able to trigger on your Malevolent as well. Not a huge deal, but still it works on both weapons, so it's still pretty good, and being able to get that extra 18% to our multi-hit chance. The last thing I want to be able to cover is going to be the Arche Tuning board. Now, there is a couple of ways that you could absolutely be able to work this one out. primarily you do want to focus on this section right here. The main reason is because we want to get all these HP and shield boosts to be able to increase the amount of HP that we do have in the build. More HP, the more DPS we'll be dealing with that skill for. But then on the left hand side, you absolutely could go for things like extra multi-hit damage, you absolutely could go for enhanced firearm attack. There are a few different ways that you could absolutely do this kind of side of things. You could potentially take off a max shield node to be able to help you out in that kind of way as well. So there are a few ways that you could mess about with the amount of DPS that you do have, but we already have 98% chance of being able to apply that multi-hit, so we don't technically need any more. While technically if you do go over 100%, you will then get additional chances of being able to trigger that multi-hit in the first place. It needs a lot of investment to be able to get to that place, and I'm rather go for something that's a little bit more consistent with the amount of HP and shield, rather than being able to go into multi-hit specifically for the Ancient Knight, when I'm going to be using Malevolent to be able to actually do most of the mobbing. And with all that out of the way, that wraps it up on my breakdown of the Purge run Serena. Overall, the sheer amount of damage that she squeezes out of a kit is enough to make any gun feel strong, but with the right builds, she becomes an absolute broken monster that makes Purge level 30 an absolute cakewalk, something that we've rarely seen before now. This is a section I want to be able to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Season 2, Episode 2 so far? Which Descendants are you maxing out on the tuning boards right now? And lastly, why are the parts of the Truly Deadly Arson so elusive? I've only ever seen 2 parts so far, and both of them are dupes of each other. Let me know all of that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. As I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on the next video.